The night my father was fighting for his life, she showed up. Not a doctor, not family, but the HOA woman from my street. She stormed into the ICU, waving rules, like she owned the place. She said she had the power to decide if my father lived or died, and when hospital security tried to stop her, she did something so shocking that the police had no choice but to take her down. Welcome back to HOA chaos, where the suburbs are never quiet and every street hides a secret. My name is Daniel. I'm just a regular homeowner. Living in a neat little cul-de-sac in Florida, I fix cars for a living, mow my lawn on weekends, and try to mind my own business. But when the HOA came after me, they dragged my family into something darker, something I never imagined, and it all started the night I sat in the ICU, praying for my father. That night in the ICU, I sat there with my hands shaking. The machines beeped in slow rhythm, each sound cutting into my chest. My father was in the bed, tubes everywhere, his breathing weak. I felt like the whole world had slowed down, like time had stopped. Then the doors opened, and in she walked, Mrs. Carter, the HOA president from my neighborhood. She wasn't family, she wasn't a doctor, but she walked in like she belonged. Her heels clicked on the floor, her face twisted into that fake smile I knew so well. The same smile she used when she fined me for leaving my trash can out too long, or when she told my neighbor his mailbox was not HOA approved. I never thought I would see her here, not in this place, not tonight, but there she was, carrying a binder. The same thick binder she always brought to HOA meetings, the binder of rules, bylaws, and her own twisted power. She looked straight at me. "Daniel," she said softly, "you can't make decisions like this without HOA oversight." For a C. Iconed. I thought I heard wrong. I blinked, my throat dry, and asked her what she was talking about. She flipped open her binder, right there in the ICU hallway, and began reading as if she was at a board meeting. Section 12, Paragraph 3. Any resident who fails to maintain compliance with HOA health and safety standards. Her voice echoed. Nurses turned their heads. One of them whispered, "Is this lady serious?" I tried to tell her, this was my father. This was not about the HOA, but she cut me off, slammed her binder shut, and pointed her finger at me. "You don't follow the rules in the neighborhood, so why should you be trusted here?" Her words felt like knives. She wasn't just trying to control lawns or mailboxes. She was trying to control life itself. I stood up, my chest tight with anger, but before I could speak, she stepped closer to my father's bed. She leaned in, her perfume sharp in the air, her voice a whisper only I could hear. "You're weak, Daniel, just like your father, and weak people don't get to make decisions." My blood boiled. I wanted to shove her out of the room, but my father's monitor beeped louder, his breathing shaky. I froze. Then a nurse stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to leave." But Mrs. Carter didn't move. She pulled out a paper from her binder, waving it like it was a legal document. "This is HOA authority," she announced. "I will decide if this man stays on life support." Gasps filled the hallway. A doctor hurried over, his voice sharp. "You have no right to be here." But Mrs. Carter's eyes gleamed, like she was feeding off the chaos. She shouted louder, about rules, about compliance, about control. My fists clenched, my body shaking. But then something snapped inside me. I stepped between her and my father's bed, blocking her view. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Oh, you're not in charge here." She laughed, that cold, empty laugh. "Daniel, I've always been in charge." She shoved past me, her hand reaching for the paperwork on the bedside table. The do not resuscitate forms, the very papers that held my father's fate. And that's when the alarms went off. The machine screamed, the doctors rushed in. The whole ICU turned into chaos. I grabbed her arm, trying to stop her, but she twisted, pulled harder. Her face wild now, eyes burning with rage. She didn't look like a neighbor anymore. She looked like something else, something dangerous. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. If she could act like this in a hospital, in front of doctors, in front of police, then what else was she capable of behind the closed doors of our neighborhood? The nurses called for security. Footsteps echoed down the hall, but she still wouldn't let go of the papers. She kept screaming, spitting out words about bylaws and power. It was like she believed the HOA gave her the right to play God, and standing there, with her nails digging into the paper, my father's life on the line. I couldn't help but wonder, how far would someone like her go to keep control? What do you think? If an HOA president from your street tried to decide your family's fate, would you fight back or freeze like I did? The alarms kept screaming. The red lights above my father's bed flashed like warning sirens. The nurses rushed in, their voices sharp. "Step back, ma'am." But Mrs. Carter didn't move. She stood tall, clutching those papers like they were the holy book of the HOA. Security stormed in. 2 guards in dark uniforms, their radios crackling. They told her to put the papers down, to leave the ICU, to let the doctors work, but she only lifted her chin. That smug smile stretched across her face. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association," she declared, like it was some crown. "And this man is a resident under my jurisdiction." The nurses looked at each other in disbelief. One muttered under her breath, "She's insane." Another whispered, "Is this real life or a TV show?" But to me, it was worse than either. It was my life, my father's life, my neighborhood madness dragging itself into a hospital hallway. I stepped forward again, trying to block her, but she shoved me aside. Her strength surprising for someone her age. She reached again for the life support documents, her nails clawing at the paper, and I realized she wasn't just trying to make a scene. She wanted power. She wanted control. She wanted to prove that even life and death bowed to the HOA. The guards grabbed her arms, tried to pull her back. She kicked one in the shin, hard enough that he stumbled. Her binder dropped to the floor, papers spilling everywhere, rules about lawn height, fines for mailbox designs, complaints about trash bins, all over the hospital tiles. And in that chaos, I saw her true face, not the tidy suburban queen she played at board meetings, but a woman drunk on control, addicted to authority, willing to destroy anything that didn't obey her. The police arrived then. 2 officers in Navy uniforms, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. One officer raised his voice. "Step away, ma'am. Now." But Mrs. Carter didn't listen. She pointed at me instead, her finger trembling with fury. "He's unfit. He's non-compliant. He cannot be trusted with decisions." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with fire. She believed what she said. She believed the HOA made her more powerful than blood, than family, than law. And in that moment, a terrible thought hit me. This wasn't about my father anymore. This was about me. This was about the years of petty battles, the fines, the warnings, the letters taped to my door. This was about how I had resisted her control in the neighborhood, and now she wanted her revenge in the worst and possible place. The officer moved closer, his hand near his belt. "Ma'am, this is your last warning." But she kept shouting about bylaws, about power, about compliance. The words echoed through the ICU, bouncing off the sterile walls, mixing with the machine beeps and the cries of patients down the hall. I felt my heart pound in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her. I wanted to end this nightmare. But my legs felt heavy, my mind frozen. Was this really happening? Was my HOA president trying to control my father's life support? Then it happened. The climax I still see in my nightmares. She lunged forward, her hands grabbing the DNR papers again, and the officers moved in at the same time. One grabbed her arm, the other pulled her back by the shoulder. She screamed like a wild animal, her voice high and sharp. "You can't stop me! I am the HOA!" Her body thrashed, her feet kicked against the floor, her hair wild in her face. And then, in one quick motion, they forced her down to the ground. The sound of her body hitting the hospital tiles echoed like a thunderclap. Her binder lay open beside her, her face pressed to the floor. Her voice muffled now. She still tried to talk, still tried to shout about rules and compliance. But her words drowned under the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The whole ICU froze. Doctors, nurses, even patients in nearby rooms stared in shock. Some had their phones out, recording every second. And I just stood there, staring at her on the floor. This woman who fined me for leaving my Christmas lights up too long. Now lying in handcuffs in the middle of a hospital, the officers pulled her up, dragged her toward the doors, her eyes locked on mine one last time. Wild, furious, filled with hate. "This isn't over, Daniel," she hissed. "The HOA always wins." The doors slammed shut behind her, and silence finally fell over the ICU. I collapsed into the chair, my hands trembling. The nurse put a hand on my shoulder. "She won't be back tonight." But I wasn't so sure, because in suburbia, they always come back later that night, when the chaos had calmed. I sat beside my father's bed, his breathing steadied. The machines beeped softer now. I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt a strange unease, because even though she was gone, her presence still lingered, her rules, her notes, her power games. They haunted every street in my neighborhood, and now they had spilled into the hospital, into the most fragile part of my life. I thought about all the times I had ignored her letters, tossed her fines in the trash, laughed at her endless warnings. And now, I wondered, had I underestimated her all along? Was she just petty? Or was she something darker, something willing to cross any line, to keep control? And then, the biggest question of all crept into my mind: if she was willing to fight this hard, over my father's life, then what would she do? When she got out of jail, I leaned closer to my father, whispering, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll protect you." But even as I said it, a chill ran down my spine, because protecting him from illness was one thing, but protecting him from the HOA, from Mrs. Carter, from the darkness behind her smile, that was another battle entirely. The next morning, I walked out of the hospital into the fresh air. The sun was rising, golden light spilling over the parking lot. For a moment, I let myself breathe, let myself believe the nightmare was over. But then I saw it, taped to the windshield of my car, a bright yellow slip of paper, an HOA violation notice. I picked it up with shaking hands. The handwriting was hers, sharp and cruel. It read, "Your vehicle is parked outside HOA guidelines. Fines will apply." I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who knew the war wasn't over. The hospital might have taken her due. The police might have dragged her out. But in the world of HOA, there are always more rules, more battles, more games. And as I held that slip of paper, I had to ask myself, what would you do if the same HOA president who tried to control your home also tried to control your family's life in a hospital? Would you fight her head on? Or would you play her game until she destroyed herself? When I came back from the hospital, I thought maybe things would calm down. My father was still fragile, but alive. I was tired, broken, just wanting peace. But in the world of an HOA, peace is never free. The next morning, I opened my mailbox. Inside was a stack of letters, thick envelopes stamped with the HOA logo. I already knew who they were from and what they meant. I ripped the first one open. Violation notice, improper lawn maintenance. Funny thing was, I had mowed my lawn before going to the hospital. The grass was shorter than her patience, but somehow, it wasn't good enough. The second letter was worse. Unauthorized vehicle parking, fine applied. It was about the same car she saw outside the hospital, the one with her violation slip. How could she even know? How could she even have time, unless she had spies watching me? By the third letter, I didn't even bother reading. I just threw them all on the kitchen table, where they spread like poison across the wood. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly. That's when I realized the hospital was just the beginning. She wasn't done with me. She never would be, and the HOA was her weapon. Days passed, and the harassment grew. Yellow slips on my door, red notes on my mailbox, even sticky notes on my trash bins, all signed with the same perfect signature. Mrs. Carter. She wasn't just an HOA president anymore. She was a queen on a chessboard. And I was the piece she wanted gone. Neighbors avoided me now. When I waved, they turned their heads. When I walked down the street, they shut their doors. Some whispered that I had brought shame to the neighborhood, that the hospital videos had gone too far. But others, I could see it in their eyes. They were scared of her too. One night, I heard scratching at my window. I froze, heart pounding, staring into the dark glass, and there it was, taped on the outside. Another notice, this one handwritten, the ink bleeding from the rain. HOA sees you always. I pulled it down with shaking hands for the first time. I wondered if she was watching me from the shadows, if she was out there, in the dark, keeping her eyes on me. The next HOA meeting was announced, and against my better judgment, I went. I needed answers. I needed to face her. The community center was full, neighbors sitting in neat rows, whispering, waiting, and there she was, at the front table. In her usual blazer and pearls, you would think she had never been arrested, never dragged out of an ICU by police. Her smile was calm, her binder neatly stacked, her gavel shining under the light. When she saw me walk in, her smile grew wider. "Ah, Mr. Daniel," she said sweetly. "We were just discussing your compliance issues." The crowd turned their heads, eyes on me. I felt the weight of their stares, the silence pressing against my chest. I stood there, fists clenched, trying not to explode. "You almost killed my father," I said softly, but she just tilted her head, like I was the one out of line. "Oh dear," she purred. "Hospital business has nothing to do with HOA matters." Laughter bubbled up from a few board members, not loud, but enough to sting, enough to remind me she had allies, soldiers willing to follow her into madness. She banged her gavel. "Motion to fine Mr. Daniel for repeated violations." Hands shot up, one after another. Neighbors I had barbecued with, borrowed tools from, smiled at during Christmas, all raising their hat, ends against me. And just like that, the fines doubled, tripled, stacked higher than I could pay. When the meeting ended, she walked past me, her perfume sharp and choking. She leaned close, her whisper soft but cutting. "You couldn't stop me in the hospital. What makes you think you can stop me here?" I walked home that night with fire in my chest. She had embarrassed me, crushed me, and turned the whole neighborhood against me. But deep down, I knew something she didn't. I wasn't going to fight her with anger. I was going to fight her with patience, with her own rules. I was going to use revenge by compliance. The next morning, I pulled out the HOA bylaws she loved so much. I read every word, every sentence, every hidden line. It was like staring into her twisted brain. Rules about fence colors, mailbox heights, even what kind of curtains were acceptable. And that's when I saw it. The loopholes, the contradictions, the flaws she never noticed. I smiled for the first time in weeks, because maybe, just maybe, I could turn her own weapons against her. So I started small. I painted my fence the exact shade of approved white listed in the bylaws. But one shade lighter, she fined me. But I appealed with the document in my hand. The board had no choice. They canceled the fine. Then I replaced my mailbox, exactly 41 inches high. The rule book said between 40 and 42. She sent another violation. But I stood at the next meeting and read the rule aloud. Again. The fine disappeared. Neighbors started to notice. Some smirked. Some whispered. A few even clapped quietly when I walked by. It wasn't much, but it was a spark that told me maybe I wasn't fighting alone. Mrs. Carter hated it. I could see it in her eyes. The way her smile cracked at the edges, she thrived on control. But control was slipping, her perfect empire was shaking, and all I had to do was keep pushing. But here's the thing. When you push someone like her, when you back them into a corner, they don't just fold, they fight back, harder, meaner, darker than before. And as I walked home that night, the cool air brushing against my face, I felt the shift. I knew the war had only just begun, and I knew she wouldn't stop until one of us was destroyed. So let me ask you this. If your HOA president turned your whole neighborhood against you, fined you into debt, and whispered threats in your ear, would you keep fighting with their own rules, or would you burn the rule book and take them down another way? The more I studied those HOA bylaws, the more I realized how broken they were. Rules written to control, rules written to confuse, rules written to trap people. But if you read carefully, if you paid attention, you could use them against themselves. And that became my weapon. Not anger, not fists, just the rules. I started small, but then I went further. My trash bins had to be concealed from street view. So I built a wooden cover, 6 feet tall, painted the exact shade approved by the HOA. It looked ridiculous. A giant wooden coffin for my garbage. Neighbors laughed when they walked by. But when she sent me a violation, I brought the rule book. I read it out loud, word for word. The board had no choice but to cancel the fine again. Every time she struck, I struck back with her own book. She said my shutters weren't compliant, so I replaced them with the approved style, but added gold trim. The bylaws didn't forbid gold. She fumed, but she couldn't stop me. It became a game, a sick, twisted game, one that I was finally winning. But it wasn't just about me anymore. Slowly, my neighbors began to notice. They whispered in grocery stores, at mailboxes, even in the school parking lot. Daniel beat her again. Daniel found the loophole. Some even knocked on my door, shy at first, then desperate. "Can you help me fight my fine?" And I did. Mr. Jenkins, fined for his flower bed being too close to the sidewalk. We measured it together. It was exactly 18 inches. The rule said minimum 18. Fine dismissed. Mrs. Lopez threatened over her Christmas lights being too colorful. We found the line in the rules. No limit on bulb colors. Fine dismissed, one by one. They came to me, and one by one, I helped them fight her. Soon I wasn't just a homeowner. I was something else. A quiet leader. A shadow resistance. The one man who dared to stand up to the queen of the HOA. And the more we fought, the more cracks showed in her empire. At meetings, her smile grew thinner, her voice sharper. Desperate, she slammed her gavel harder each time I spoke. Her hand shook when I quoted her own rules back at her. It was like watching a castle crumble, brick by brick, rule by rule. But then, she changed tactics. She stopped attacking me directly. Instead, she turned the neighborhood against itself. Letters arrived at other homes. Mysterious warnings. Anonymous fines. Neighbors started blaming each other. "Did you report me? Are you the reason I got fined?" The block grew tense. Friendships cracked. Whispers turned to shouts. It was psychological warfare, divide and conquer, her favorite strategy. And for a while, it worked. People stopped trusting me. They thought maybe I was feeding her information. Maybe I was the spy. Even the ones I helped started stepping back. I was alone again, facing her shadow games. But here's the thing about power. When people see someone lose it, when they see weakness, they never forget. And Mrs. Carter had shown weakness in the hospital. She had shown weakness at the meetings, no matter how many letters she sent, no matter how many fines she printed. People remembered her screaming on that hospital floor, so I pushed harder. I filed appeal after appeal, every time she fined. At me, I buried her in paperwork, every rule she used. I turned it inside out. The HOA board grew tired. Drowning in their own system, meetings dragged on for hours. Every topic turning into a legal fight. Neighbors stopped coming. No one wanted to sit through her chaos anymore. Her empire was cracking, and she knew it. One night, I caught her standing on my sidewalk. The streetlight above her flickered, shadows dancing across her face. She wasn't smiling this time. Her eyes looked dark, hollow, tired. She stared at my house for a long time, then slipped a note into my mailbox and walked away. I waited until she was gone before opening it. The paper was thin. Her handwriting neat as always. It read, "You can't win, Daniel. HOA is forever." I crumpled it in my hand, but deep down, I knew she was right about one thing. The HOA wasn't going anywhere. It was bigger than her, bigger than me, bigger than any one neighbor. But that didn't mean she had to win. The next meeting, I brought allies, Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Lopez, and 3 others. We sat in the front row together, arms crossed, ready. When she tried to find me again, we all spoke up. When she tried to dismiss me, they demanded a vote. And for the first time, the board didn't just nod along with her. They hesitated. They whispered. They looked uneasy. The tide was turning. The Queen's soldiers were starting to question their orders, but she wasn't done yet. She leaned forward, her voice sharp as glass. "If you think you can outsmart me, Daniel, you're wrong. I always win." And then she smiled. That dangerous smile, the one I had seen in the hospital, the one that promised she was willing to go further than anyone else that night. As I locked my doors, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about bylaws anymore. This was about survival, because when you strip someone, like her, of power, they don't just fade away, they explode. The night after that meeting, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, that sharp, dangerous smile, the smile of someone who was losing control, but wasn't ready to let go. I checked my locks twice, then 3 times. I sat by the window with the porch light on. Every sound outside made me flinch. A barking dog, a car door, the rustle of the wind through the trees, because I knew she wasn't finished. Not yet. The next morning, I found it, spray paint on my garage door. Non-compliant trash, in big red letters, dripping down like blood. Neighbors gathered to stare, whispering behind their hands. Some shook their heads. Others smirked like they were enjoying the show. But no one said a word to me. I knew who did it. Her perfume still lingered in the air, faint but undeniable. She wanted me humiliated. She wanted me broken. But instead of painting over it, I left it there. Because according to HOA rules, graffiti removal was the board's responsibility. And when I filed the complaint, they had to spend HOA funds to clean my garage. The board groaned, argued. But the rule was clear. She had paid for her own crime, and the look on her face when the workers painted over my garage, priceless. But the victory didn't last long, because that's when she went nuclear. Letters started arriving at every house in the neighborhood, not just violations, but threats. Failure to pay fines will result in foreclosure. Non-compliance will be reported to county officials. She even claimed she had the legal right to shut off utilities. It was madness. But the scariest part, people believed her. I watched neighbors break down. Mr. Jenkins sold his boat out of fear of more fines. Mrs. Lopez stopped putting up decorations for her kids' birthdays. Even the quiet couple at the end of the street cut down their old oak tree because she claimed it was unauthorized. Landscaping. The block turned gray, lawns stripped bare, porches empty, everyone living in silence and fear. It wasn't suburbia anymore. It was a prison. With her as the warden, I tried to fight back. I handed out copies of the real bylaws. I showed neighbors the rules she twisted, the lies she told. But some were too scared to listen, and others, well, some liked following orders. Some liked watching her destroy anyone who resisted. It gave them power too. The neighborhood split in two. On one side, those who obeyed her. On the other, those who whispered about rebellion, but were too afraid to act. And me, I was stuck in the middle, the man who stood up to her, but also the man everyone blamed for making her worse. Things got darker when the power games left paper and ink and turned physical. One night, my trash bins vanished. I woke up to find them gone, stolen in the night. When I reported it, she fined me for failure to store bins properly. Another time, I came home to find my mailbox ripped out of the ground, the post broken in half, the box smashed and taped to it. Another violation. Mailbox not in compliance with HOA standards. She was baiting me, pushing me, trying to make me snap, and I almost did. One night, after another long meeting where she screamed about my pattern of non-compliance, I walked out to my car and found all 4 tires slashed. The note on my windshield said, "Consider this a warning." I stood there in the dark parking lot, fists clenched, heart pounding. Part of me wanted to march back inside, scream at her, call her out in front of everyone. But I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to explode. She wanted me to look unstable so she could finally take me down legally. Instead, I took a deep breath and called a tow truck. But inside, I made a decision. If she wanted war, I'd give her war, but not theft. The way she expected, I started gathering evidence. Every violation, every threat. Every time she twisted the rules, I photographed the spray paint, the broken mailbox, the slashed tires. I kept every letter, every fine, every warning she sent. I talked to neighbors quietly, gathering their stories, and soon, I had a thick stack of proof. Proof that she wasn't protecting the neighborhood, proof that she was terrorizing it. But even with all that, I hesitated, because I knew if I made a move, it would get worse before it got better. And I asked myself, was I ready for that? Was I ready for the storm she would unleash when she realized I was fighting back with more than just bylaws? That question haunted me for days, until the night I caught her again. It was past midnight, the street empty, the moon high in the sky. I heard footsteps outside my window, slow, deliberate. Like someone wanted me to hear, I peeked through the blinds. And there she was, Mrs. Carter, standing on my lawn, staring up at my house. Her face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes dark shadows. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there for what felt like forever. And then, slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed at me, her finger trembling, but steady enough to make my blood run cold. Then she turned and walked away into the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the shadows, waiting for her to come back, but she never did. The next morning, I found another note on my porch. This one wasn't typed or neat. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, like she had written it in a frenzy. You think you're safe because of the law, but laws can be broken, and people can disappear. I stared at the note, my hands shaking, and that's when I realized this wasn't just about HOA anymore. This was about survival, about who would break first. I still remember holding that note in my hands. The words burned into my head. People can disappear. It wasn't just a threat anymore, it was a promise. I called the police that morning. An officer came, young, tired, probably more used to break-ins than HOA wars. He read the note, raised his eyebrows, and asked me if I had any enemies. I almost laughed. Enemies? I had an entire HOA president living across the street, but I didn't laugh. I just nodded and told him everything. He scribbled in his little notepad, but I could tell from his eyes, he thought it was just neighborhood drama. Keep your doors locked, install cameras, call us if it happens again. That was all he said before driving away. I stood on my porch, watching his taillights fade, and realized something. The police weren't going to save me. The system wasn't going to save me. If I wanted this to end, I'd have to save myself, so I doubled down. I installed cameras on every corner of my house. I kept my phone ready, recording every sound, every shadow, and slowly, I gathered more evidence. Her sneaking onto my lawn, her leaving papers in my mailbox at night, her screaming at neighbors in the street. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was proof. But the more I fought back, the more reckless she became. She started showing up at my door in broad daylight, pounding on the wood with her fists, shouting for everyone to hear. Non-compliant trash. Unapproved shutters. You're destroying this neighborhood. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering, some laughing, some shaking their heads, and every time she left another notice taped to my door, I took them all, filed them in a binder of my own. My binder grew thicker every week, until it looked just like hers, except mine wasn't filled with rules. It was filled with proof of her madness. But then she made her biggest move yet. One afternoon, I came home to a letter from the county courthouse. My stomach dropped when I read the first line. The HOA, led by Mrs. Carter, was suing me. They accused me of repeated violations, of creating hostile conditions for neighbors, of failing to maintain property according to HOA standards. They wanted thousands in fines, and worse, they threatened foreclosure on my house. I kept my phone ready, recording every sound, every shadow. And slowly, I gathered more evidence. Her sneaking onto my lawn, her leaving papers in my mailbox at night, her screaming at neighbors in the street. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was proof. But the more I fought back, the more reckless she became. She started showing up at my door in broad daylight, pounding on the wood with her fists, shouting for everyone to hear. Non-compliant trash. Unapproved shutters. You're destroying this neighborhood. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering, some laughing, some shaking their heads, and every time, she left another notice taped to my door. I took them all, filed them in a binder of my own. My binder grew thicker every week, until it looked just like hers, except mine wasn't filled with rules. It was filled with proof of her madness. But then she made her biggest move yet. One afternoon, I came home to a letter from the county courthouse. My stomach dropped when I read the first line. The HOA, led by Mrs. Carter, was suing me. They accused me of repeated violations, of creating hostile conditions for neighbors, of failing to maintain property according to HOA standards. They wanted thousands in fines, and worse, they threatened foreclosure on my house. I sat at my kitchen table, letter shaking in my hands. She had finally done it. She had turned her petty war into a legal battle, a battle that could take my home, for a moment. I felt crushed, defeated, like she had finally won. But then, I looked at my binder, page after page of notes, photos, recordings, and I realized I wasn't powerless anymore. I had a weapon. The truth. I called a lawyer the next day. He flipped through my binder, his eyebrows rising higher with every page. By the time he closed it, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "This isn't just harassment," he said, too. "His is abuse of power." For the first time in months, I felt hope. The court date came fast. Neighbors filled the gallery, curious, hungry for drama. On one side, Mrs. Carter sat with her pearls and blazer, her binder stacked high. On the other side, I sat with my lawyer and my own binder of truth. The judge walked in. The room went silent, and then it began. She spoke first, her voice smooth, polished, like a politician. She talked about order, about standards, about protecting property values. She painted me as the villain, the reckless neighbor who broke rules, who threatened harmony, who refused to obey. Some heads in the gallery nodded. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I stayed quiet. Then it was my turn. My lawyer opened my binder, one by one. He laid out the evidence, the spray paint on my garage, the slashed tires, the midnight notes, the recordings of her screaming about life support in the ICU. The room shifted. Gasps. Whispers. People leaning forward in their seats, and for the first time, I saw her crack. Her hands shook, her smile faded, her eyes darted left and right, looking for an escape. The judge leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Mrs. Carter, this goes far beyond HOA authority." She stammered, tried to defend herself, tried to spin it as necessary enforcement. But no one was buying it, not anymore. When the gavel finally fell, the decision was clear. The lawsuit was dismissed, and instead, the judge ordered an investigation into her behavior. The gallery erupted. Some neighbors clapped. Others just sat stunned. And me, I sat frozen in my seat, hardly believing it was real. As we left the courthouse, she passed me in the hallway, her eyes locked on mine. No pearls, no smile this time, just pure venom. "You may have won today," she whispered, "but this isn't over." I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the tile, her back straight but her shoulders trembling. For the first time, she looked small, but something deep inside me knew. She wasn't finished. Not yet. That night, I sat on my porch with my binder in my lap. The air was cool, the street quiet, too quiet. I should have felt safe, I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt the weight of something heavier, because I knew people like her don't just stop. They find new ways, darker ways, to take control. And I couldn't help but wonder, if the court couldn't stop her completely, then what would she do next? Would she come back stronger, more dangerous, more desperate? Would she burn the whole neighborhood down just to keep her crown after the court case? Things went quiet for a while. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl, like the air is holding its breath. Neighbors whispered about her. Some said she was finished. Some said she had lost her power, but I knew better. I had seen the look in her eyes when she left that courtroom, that venom, that fire. She wasn't done, not yet. At first, she kept her distance. No more notes on my porch, no more screaming at my door. But then, little things started happening. One night, I heard the sound of glass breaking. I ran outside and found my porch light shattered. A week later, I woke up to the sound of my car alarm blaring. Both side mirrors were snapped clean off. Then came the letters again. Not official HOA notices this time, just handwritten notes, angry, messy, filled with threats. "You don't belong here. This street will bury you." HOA never forgets. I kept every one of them. stacking them in my binder. But each letter made the pit in my stomach grow deeper. Then came the night everything boiled over. It was a Friday evening. I had just gotten back from the hospital. Visiting my father, I pulled into the driveway. Tired, heavy-eyed, just wanting to collapse into bed. But when I stepped out of the car, I smelled it, smoke. At first I thought it was a grill, but then I saw the orange glow. My fence was on fire. Flames climbed the wood fast, the heat stinging my skin. I grabbed the hose, sprayed water like a madman, coughing on the smoke. Neighbors came running, some yelling, some just watching, and standing at the end of the street, in the flickering firelight, was Mrs. Carter. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her smile cold as ice. When our eyes met, she mouthed the words, "You can't win." The fire department came, sirens slicing through the night. They put out the flames before they reached the house. The fence was gone, charred black. But my home stood, and I knew. She had crossed the final line. The police came too. I handed them the binder. Every note, every photo, every video, every letter. I told them about the spray paint, the slashed tires, the smashed mailbox, the threats. And now, the fire. This time, they listened. This time, they didn't look bored or dismissive. This time, they took her away. I watched from my porch as they put her in the back of the car, her hair messy, her blazer stained with sweat. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like a prisoner. Neighbors stood in silence. Some whispered. Some filmed on their phones. Some even clapped quietly. But me, I just stood there, numb. Because even though she was gone, the scars she left behind weren't. The HOA board scrambled after that. Meetings turned chaos. Tick. Members resigning. Homeowners shouting, "Without her control." The whole system cracked. Fines stopped being enforced. Letters stopped arriving. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. And yet, it was strange. Lawns grew wild. Mailboxes leaned. Christmas lights stayed up until spring. It was messy, imperfect, human. And I realized, maybe that was the point all along. Maybe suburbia was never meant to be perfect. Maybe it was meant to be alive. Months later, the court gave its verdict. She was banned from holding any HOA position again, fined for harassment, vandalism, and arson. The board dissolved completely, replaced by a voluntary committee with no real power. The queen had fallen, the crown had crumbled, the kingdom was free. But even now, I still see her face in my dreams. I still hear her words echoing in my head. You can't win. HOA always wins. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she still believes that, if she's sitting in some small apartment now, plotting, waiting, or if she finally realized the only thing she ever ruled was fear. One evening, I sat on my porch with my father. He was stronger now, his breathing steady, his laugh soft but real. We looked out at the neighborhood. Kids rode bikes on sidewalks again. Neighbors waved at each other without fear. The air felt lighter, like we had all been released from a spell. My father turned to me, his eyes tired but sharp. "You fought a good fight, son." I smiled, but inside I wondered if it was really over. Because here's the truth. Power doesn't die easy. Control doesn't fade without a fight. And people like Mrs. Carter, they don't just disappear. They linger in the cracks, in the shadows, in the whispers of suburbia. The grass may grow, the fences may stand, the mailboxes may shine, but behind closed doors, behind curtains, behind fake smiles, the CUIO, period of HOA, still waits, and that's what keeps me awake at night.